Well, welcome here to the Stillpoint Podcast, and I'm really honored. My name's Jean Maynard. I'm really honored to have Jeanine Joyner join me. Jeanine, I have not met her in person. It's the first time talking with her like this, live via the help of recording. But I've been following her writing on Substack, and it's been something that just has always moved my heart. She's such a good storyteller, and she brings her lifestyle and she brings her faith and she brings her family and just brings her into the middle of the writing. And it always touches me in a deep way. And so I wanted those of you who read what I'm writing to get acquainted with Jeanine and become one of her followers. She does such a great job of integrating faith and life together. And so I think you'll be really blessed by that. So Jeanine, thank you for joining me here on this podcast.
Thank you. I am very honored to be here.
Yeah, so let's start. So I know I know this just because of your writing. You and your husband, your family, you live in a bit of a rural. It may be more rural than I know, but at least it's not in the middle of an urban community. So you're living in a more rural setting. So talk about that. How did that
Yeah.
happen? What's that like? What does it do to your soul?
Okay, good. As you can tell by my accent, I live in the South, and we live in Tennessee, just southeast of Nashville. We are in a very small town, just about 10 minutes from Murfreesboro, which is a pretty decent sized city. So we're close to town. We don't have to go more than 10 minutes to the grocery store. So it's kind of the best of both worlds. We have 8 acres. We've got goats, chickens, dogs, cats. At one time we had ducks. We've had rabbits. I mean, we experiment in everything. But we've lived here for about 5 years, and most of our life had lived in a city, or at least a, pretty decent sized town, but I'd always dreamed of having a farm. My mom grew up on a farm. I heard stories of it growing up. And when we found this house and it had land, I told my husband, I'll move there if I can have animals. And he said, okay. So that's what we did. So it's really a hobby farm. We do get eggs from the chickens. I garden, grow lots of vegetables in the summer. I can as much as I am able. I made a whole bunch of bread and butter pickles this summer out of cucumbers, but it's kind of mostly a hobby farm. We don't live off of it. We could if we needed to. So I like having it just here. It's kind of security. I know that if nothing else, I've got vegetables and eggs. You can
So
survive
it
on
sounds
that.
like it was a deliberate choice. You were
Oh, yeah.
found a place and you decided, we could stay living in a larger community, or we could go here. Talk
Mhm.
about that decision. You kind of said it was a family background, but you made a deliberate choice to change lifestyle.
Yeah, we were living in a neighborhood, where we'd only been there about 2 years and just did not connect. It was a beautiful neighborhood. The people were very nice, but it wasn't we just didn't connect for whatever reason. I was homeschooling my children at the time. I was the only homeschooler in the entire neighborhood. My husband is in the medical field, so he works long hours. And, homeschooling is a different lifestyle in
Mm.
itself. Most of my homeschool friends were closer to where I'm living now. We lived in Murfreesboro for about 12 years, 13 years, moved closer to Franklin, and then we moved back here to where we are now. So our life had stayed in Murfreesboro, and our friends had as well. So we just never connected. So we debated moving back. And when this house came available, it was perfect because I love the idea of having space. I love the idea of not being crowded. I craved quiet. I craved a slower lifestyle. Just being able to, walk outside in my pajamas if I want to, or, sit out, watch the sunset and just hear the birds and not hear city sounds. That was a big draw for me and for both of us.
So you often write about just elements, or you at least weave in elements of living in that lifestyle into your writing.
Yeah.
So it's touched you at some level. You're finding things. My wife and I are going to be moving shortly from a pretty busy lifestyle to a much slower, quieter lifestyle in a rural area. What would you tell us, or what would you tell anyone who says, there's a lot of noise in my life, actually trying to figure this out would be worthwhile.
I would say do it. Definitely do it if you're able. It is a lot of work. Because my husband works long hours, it's on me. It sounds like you two will have more of a team effort with this, but this was my baby that I really wanted. And he fully supported it and he helps me. He'll hold a goat down while I'm trimming hooves, or he'll help me give shots, that sort of thing. But, I'm hauling 50-pound feed bags. I'm filling buckets of water that have frozen over in the winter. I'm cleaning out, mucking out sheds when the goats have just destroyed the pine shavings and it's nasty. I'm cleaning the chicken coop and having to wear a mask because of all the ammonia. I mean, it's a dirty, stinky hobby, but it is so rewarding. I always say I feel like Snow White when I walk outside because all the animals come running to me. They're all running around my ankles, waiting for their turn. They know the routine. They know who gets fed, when, and where, and they all go to their places because we do it the same every day. There's just something very calming about the routine. There's a different noise on a farm than there is in the city. You've got the clucking and the sheep. I'm not the sheep, the goats. We have sheep down the road. We've got cows across the street, that neighbors have. And to me, that is very calming, very grounding to live out here like this. The only challenge is finding community. And you have to be really intentional because when you live really far away from your neighbors, we have neighbors, we see them. In passing, but it's really easy to become isolated and lonely. And I'm an extrovert. So I have to be very intentional to make appointments, lunch appointments with friends, drive into town. If I'm going to write, and I've been alone a lot, I'll sometimes drive into town and go to my favorite coffee shop just so that I'm around
Mm.
people and can
Yeah.
interact because I need that. So you kind of have to know yourself and know what your needs are and make sure that you're staying balanced with it.
Yeah, that's a great point. My wife and I have been wondering about that. We will have neighbors too that we'll see from time to time, but it'll be the first time in our life where we've had to look for a church, first time where we haven't had just people around us constantly. And we've been actually having a lot of conversation about that. What steps do we take to make sure that we find community, stay in community, and not fall for the trap of isolating?
Yeah, and it's easy to do. It's really easy to become it's a gradual slope, all of a sudden you realize, "Gosh, I
Mm.
haven't seen anybody in 3 days. I'm really lonely."
So just one more thing in this. So just the calmer, I've been wondering a lot about that. It just seems like our culture is so fast paced, so noisy. It just,
Yeah.
and it really isn't about location. It's just everywhere we're at. What have you noticed about slower, a little simpler, maybe a little quieter, that's actually healthy? You've just identified a drawback in that we could become isolated. But if we figure out how to deal with that, what are some of the advantages spiritually,
Mm,
socially, relationally of being able to have a slower, little simpler lifestyle? I love the fact it's
yeah.
not easier. It's a lot of work, but simpler.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, for me, it has been a way that I connect with God. Being outside with the animals and watching how they interact, living out this daily routine of caring for them, it has helped me to see Him and to hear from him in ways that I hadn't before. I mean, God so often in the Bible talks about, he teaches, Jesus teaches along the lines of farms and gardens and creation. And, we started in a garden. That's what Eden was. And that was his original intent for man. And when I am out there with the animals, he talks to me. I'll just
Yeah.
hear um, for instance, we had a situation this summer. We lost one of our goats, and it was very sudden, and it was a terrible experience. He suffered. We had to have him put down, and it was our favorite one. He was the
Mhm.
ringleader, and so that was really hard. And as we were waiting on the vet to arrive to help us put him down humanely, I kept going back and forth from the house to the goats, to the house to the goats. And I debated, do I sit with him? Do I go inside? What does he need right now? And all of a sudden I looked up and every animal that we have, every cat, every dog, every chicken, we're all standing in the pen. We have 3 pens that are
Wow.
open to each other. And all of them were standing in the pen,
Wow.
just sitting with him. And they were
Wow.
quiet. And I looked up and I'm like, he's not alone. And I felt like God was just speaking to me, like, even in the most horrible, terrible moments, you are not alone. Even my creatures, I'm with the creatures as well. He loves his creation. So that's just one example
You know,
of just this profound truth that I learned by caring for these animals. I feel like it's just living out parables, all the time.
what a story. Wow.
Yeah,
That's amazing.
very powerful.
That is really powerful. Well, thanks for sharing that. I love reading just the times you weave in some elements. I always love and then start to picture what it'll be like for us. So thank you for sharing that. So let's shift topics to. I think maybe about the time I started following you, you were working in a church.
Hmm.
At least you were leading a portion of a ministry in a church, in the
Yeah,
women's ministry, and I think it might have been kind of a evangelical route to it, maybe a charismatic route. I might be way off
yeah.
on that, so forgive me if
No,
I.
you're exactly right.
Okay,
Yeah,
and then
yeah.
you shifted to a much more liturgical church, and I don't know anything about that, but I'm curious about the decision and what that's been like for you.
Yeah, boy, that was a big change. I was leading women's ministry, absolutely loved it, but it was a very big box evangelical kind of, we hear people talk about three songs in a TED talk. It was really what it was. And when God called me to ministry, he made it clear that I was to teach these women their identity because there was a lot of grace and works being mixed in the pulpit. And even just within the church, it was a very diverse church, people coming in from many different backgrounds. And I realized quickly that women did not know who they were in Christ.
Hmm.
And they had no framework for like a daily spiritual discipline, how to really connect with God in a meaningful way. There was a lot of hyper spirituality, but there wasn't a depth to it. It was so clear. People who'd been believers for 20, 30 years and they'd never read the Bible. And so I spent the years I was in women's ministry was really focused on helping women read through the whole Bible, which we did, and teaching them identity, really focusing on the book of Romans and on Galatians. But
Hmm.
as we were working through that, it was a lot of it was being undone in the pulpit because there were conflicting teachings. And the church just became very performance oriented. I remember the first ministry event I led. I had never done anything like that before. And at the end of the event, we had an opportunity for women to come forward for prayer. And I failed to have the audio guys have a pad prepared, which is like an underlying sound of like chords, that are playing kind of as quiet filler. They don't want it to be quiet. And I failed to arrange that. And so when the event's over, it's just dead quiet. And, all these women are coming forward and we're praying for them. And someone mentioned, you really need to have the pad playing. And they were so uncomfortable with the quiet, and I was too, and it struck me like, "Oh my gosh, we can't even handle silence. We have to have something playing all the time to fill the space." And so when I led retreats, we would have quiet sessions, we would have contemplative sessions, and it was completely foreign to most of them, but it was just beautiful to see them receive that in these tools that they could use. And so I led the ministry for about 2 years, absolutely loved it, and then just due to a lot of factors, a lot of things in the church became unhealthy. And when the Lord told me it was time to go, he made it very, very clear. And I knew, and I told him, I'm not going to leave until you tell me to. And when he did, there was no doubt. And so we stepped away, which meant stepping away from a huge community of friends. And as you probably know, when you leave a church, as much as you want to stay connected with friends, it just doesn't happen. If you don't see each other every Sunday, it takes a lot of work to maintain friendships in that world. And so we went through a few months of just soul searching. What do we want out of church? We had had experience with liturgical events before through different retreats we'd gone to, I am involved with a ministry called the Rabbit Room, which is based here in Nashville. And they have a lot of liturgy and liturgical materials that they produce. And
Hmm.
I go to their conference almost every year. And so, through that and other ways, we had experience with liturgy and we just loved it. So I ended up Googling liturgical churches near me. This little Anglican church popped up. Didn't even know we had an Anglican church in our
Yeah.
town. And we decided to visit. And we left the first service, and my husband looked at me and he goes, "You loved that, didn't you?" And I said, "I feel like my soul was just fed." And it just stayed with me for days. It's a smells and bells church, incense and liturgy and organ, and just completely throwback to old ways of doing things. But there's no hype. There's nobody platformed. I always say it's blessedly boring. It's completely predictable. We know we're using the Book of Common Prayer. We know every week what to expect. There's no surprises. And for us, that has been extremely calming. And even for one of our daughters, she deals with some pretty significant anxiety. And she said when she walks into that building, she feels like her anxiety just falls off.
So I was going to
So
ask, so you've been, had some exposure to liturgical. So what was that like for your husband? You just mentioned it's been beneficial for your daughter. What was that like for your husband?
he really liked it. He had grown up in the military and had had some experiences in liturgy as well as a child. I believe his mother was raised Methodist, so he had had some
Okay.
exposure. So for him, it was nice just to be in a place because where he works, he's in charge. He's giving orders. That's his job all day long. And then there's one day a week where he just does what he's told. It's you kneel, you stand, you sit, you sing, and there's just something very relaxing about, okay, here's what we do now. It's been decided. I don't have to make any decisions. And we love that we probably read through 4 chapters of scripture any service. And the sermons are very, very short to the point, and for him, that's been really important is that the priest is not trying to scratch an itch or address something he's mad about. He's sticking faithfully to the scriptures as planned years and years ago. And it feels very safe. And for both of us, that was really important was to feel safe.
No. Well, you've mentioned so many things that are just plaguing the church today. That performative art side of it, the TED Talks, meets a concert, meets a coffee shop. Just the whole
Yep.
things that it has become. Just one more question about that. How do you explain this to your friends who are probably, whether it's a big church or not, but most people with a kind of evangelical, maybe a little more conservative background, they are used to that kind of high performance level of church, or at least the attempt to be a high performance level of church. How do you explain this to your friends?
Yeah, it was very tricky at first, especially since most of our friends were in the church we left, because I didn't want to cause division. I didn't want to, you know, say bad things about it. I answered their questions honestly, and most really wanted to know. For those who weren't part of that church, but still just have questions, they'll be like, "Well, I could never sit in a church. That's boring, whatever." The way I deal with it is I just say, for us, this has been healing. For us, this has been calming. We feel like this is a good fit for us. We recognize it's not for everyone. Even our priest, he'll say, he said, I can look in the congregation and I can see by people's expressions that this is not a good fit for them. So he's really good friends
Mhm.
with the guy at another big church here in town. And he'll say, "Hey, let me connect you. You might like that church a little better." So I think it's being careful to not be arrogant about our
Yeah, good
place
point.
where we are because it's really easy to do that when you discover something that really blesses you. It's easy to think, well, everyone should do this. If this works for me, this should work for you too. But for some people, it's not a good fit. Our sons hate it. Our boys don't go to the church with us. They do their
Mhm.
own thing, and they're all adults, and so we don't expect them to do it. But personalities are different, and churches that have that more modern style, many of them are doing very good work, and
Right.
many of them are deeply impacting the people that attend there. So just for us, the change was what we needed. So I try to be really careful
Yeah, no, that's really
in
good. I
explaining.
appreciate the fact you're sensitive about that. But For those of you who are just tapping in and listening to this, there's so many people just frustrated with church, disappointed with church, maybe even walking away from church, maybe keeping faith, but
Mhm.
leaving church. There are alternatives, and I'm sure Jeanine would be happy to connect with you if you want to reach out to her through her Substack and message her. I'm
Absolutely.
sure she could give you some ideas about just her experience and what maybe to look for. So I love the fact that one of the reasons I wanted you to hear this is there are alternatives to just leaving
Yes.
church. There's other ways to do this. So it's very, very cool.
Yeah.
So you mentioned in women's ministry, you noticed that women are struggling with identity. And so I've been a pastor most of my adult life, women's ministries I'm watching. And so just kind of walk me through this. If you and I were working together, what would you tell me about what we need to have happen in a women's ministry? What is it that works? What's getting in the way of women's ministry being transformative for women? What's your experience?
Yeah, I think a lot of what gets in the way is the stereotypical sparkly pink, lacy women's events. you know, kind of the assumption that all women like the same thing and some women that just doesn't appeal to them. You've got athletic women, you've got single women, married women, women with kids, women without kids, all have very different struggles, very different upbringings. Some have very legalistic upbringings, was my experience. You've got others who've grown up in really great grace teaching and they're pretty good with a lot. And it's really hard to find a middle ground that meets all their needs. And so I think the biggest thing women need that I see across the board, no matter how you've grown up or what your background is how does who I am in Christ affect my day-to-day decisions? And when I see women struggling with sexual sin, broken relationships, loneliness, isolation, addiction, all those things, every single one of those issues boils down to they don't know who they are. Because if I really knew who I was, I wouldn't do the things I'm doing. If I really knew I was beloved of God, I wouldn't take that pill, or I wouldn't scream at my kids, or I wouldn't walk away from a good man because I've found another guy over here. There's all these behaviors that are the direct result of a broken image of our own identity. And you can grow up with great teaching, but still have these doubts of, does God really love me? Am
Mm,
I really important? Is my life valuable? And so my heart's desire has been to get women to see, like, you are beloved of God. Your belovedness didn't begin when you prayed a prayer or when you stepped into the right church. Your belovedness began before time. Jesus is the savior of the world. He was the savior before the foundation of the world. So his love for us preceded us. And when you recognize that, it takes that need to perform and that need to strive away, and you can rest in who you are and let him work through you and stop doing things in your own strength. And so when I look at women's ministry, women don't need more things to do. They don't need more events or, um, coffee break. Not that those aren't bad things, but they need meaningful, profound reassurance of who they are in Christ.
mhm. Is this your my wife early on when I hadn't been a pastor very long, my wife had gone to a women's gathering, not different church than where I am now, but she came back in the evening and she was so frustrated. I said, "Oh, what happened?" I thought maybe someone had been mean to her. Just that was my reaction as a husband. And she said, "No, no, I'm fine personally," but said, "I'm never going to go back to this." And I said, "Well, why?" In my head, I'm going, maybe that's not a deal. You might have to go
Mhm.
back. You're that pastor's wife. And no, I'm not going back. Said they spent the entire time arguing about at the next event, is it going to be cupcakes or sheet cakes?
Yeah.
And she said that was kind of the level of what they wanted to do in women's ministries. I think that's what I'm
Yeah.
hearing you say.
Yeah, that's exactly right. We get so into these outside details that really don't matter. And trying to get women to agree on something, oh my gosh. You get 12, 13 women in a room and try to make a decision, nothing's going to be done because there's too many cooks in the kitchen.
Right.
You've got to have they need more depth. They need to talk about things that matter. And I know as a woman, one of the biggest challenges is feeling safe to be vulnerable. And, when you're walking through really difficult seasons, whether it's, personal sin or trauma or, whatever else is going on, if you don't have women that you can be fully transparent with, it is so dangerous. We have a couple of children, one specifically who has significant mental health issues, and we have dealt with addiction and all that goes with that the past handful of years. That was the single most isolating experience of my life
Mhm.
because most women walk away because they're scared that that could happen to them and their kids. So they turn their back on you. I had about three friends that stuck with me through those years
Mm.
out of, dozens and dozens of women I knew because we don't know how to sit with each other without judgment.
Right.
And so when I go into a group of women, if I'm able to talk to them and I'm able to say, yeah, we've dealt with this in our life, most of the time in the circles I'm in now, they'll go, oh my gosh, so have I. Or did you know so and so over here has? In our church specifically, there are many women who are walking through very difficult situations with children or spouses, very similar to what we dealt with. But until someone is vulnerable enough to speak out,
Right.
everyone thinks they're alone. But man, you feel safe to say your stuff out loud, it opens the floodgates. And all of a sudden, all this connection is made. And that's really what it's all about is that need for connection. And you cannot have connection without vulnerability. It's just
Mhm.
impossible. And
Well, you
honesty.
mentioned so many important things for everything you've said just works also in men's lives, maybe different
Hmm.
tone how you say it, but it's the same issue. And I was just thinking as you were talking the last piece about, can you say out loud what's going on? There's something about the entire atmosphere of the church. I mean, it all works together. If the church is going to anchor down on being a performative place, it's pretty hard, even in this, even in some of the ministries of the church, to get to that level that you're describing.
Yeah.
So it's a whole atmosphere kind of piece that
Oh,
works together.
yeah. Yeah, one of the biggest issues I've seen is that counsel to pray it away. You just pray hard enough and believe hard enough,
Yeah.
then this really terrible thing's going to go away. Mental illness, whatever it
Mhm.
is
Yeah.
just dismissed when that happens. And so people, if they're struggling, then they come in on themselves and say, "Gosh, it must be that I don't have enough faith." Or I didn't pray hard enough. It's like, no, sometimes your brain is broken because our brain's an organ and it can be affected just like anything else in our body can by disease and, age.
Mm. Well, I wanted to make sure you get a second to talk about what you're doing with your writing and draw attention to your Substack. But just this is so important. So what would you say to a woman who's listening to this right now and she's whatever it happens to be, she's hearing you say there's an alternative to hiding, there's an alternative to believing a lie about who you are. What would you say to that person?
I would say to not give up on the church. Don't give up on other women. It is hard and it's hurtful when you deal with rejection or judgment, but if you can continue pushing through and just but putting yourself out there are women who will love you. There are women who will support you and encourage you and come alongside you, pray with you. God's heart for you is to be in community. He does not intend for us to be alone. And I always tell women, you're his girls. We're his kids. And he's a good father and he's crazy about his kids. And we have to remember that when we're struggling. All those lies that come at us, those are never from him. He's crazy about us and we've got to know that. And so when I write, that's my hope is to just share, just what it means to be um a daughter of the king with a really, really great dad and to what does that look like? It means that you can travel and you see the world differently, like we just recently did. I look at all these people in other countries, like he loves every one of those people. They may not know it yet, but he loves them. Stepping into a coffee shop and you see the barista differently when you recognize that this person's made in the image of God just like me. My belovedness transforms the way I see the belovedness of others. And so as women, we need that because the culture for women is just toxic right now. Women are catty and judgmental, but we as Christians, we can change that narrative and we can love each other well with the love that God pours through us.
I've loved everything you've just been talking about. We should probably just keep this going, but we can't. But I would encourage all of you who have just been touched by that, like I have, check out Janine's writing. So let's talk about that. So tell us about your Substack. That's how I first met you. I just was reading. There's
Yeah.
something lyrical about how you write. There's something. You're a storyteller. I don't know where that comes from in your background, but you're so artful with how you take an idea and develop it. So talk about writing. Let's just start there. What about writing
Okay.
is important for you?
Yeah. Okay. First of all, you've always been really encouraging because you're probably one of the first people I connected with on Substack when I got on there. So I really appreciate that.
Mm.
My storytelling came from the way I grew up. I grew up in a small town in Texas. My mom has written poetry as gifts for people throughout my life. She's really great with words. We had the Sunday afternoon gatherings after church where everyone sat around and just told stories. I mean, that's what families did back then. So I would say it's probably the root of
Sure.
where it came from. And then growing up in school, I always loved English classes. Give me an essay. I'm so happy to write you an essay. Give me a topic. I loved writing. I loved English. I loved grammar, all those things. And I would journal. I would write poetry. I would write stories. And the teachers always loved it. Never thought about doing anything really beyond that until much later into adulthood. And then in the early 2000s when the mommy blogs became all the thing, I started a blog about my kids and just kind of dabbled in putting things out there. And people were like, "You're a good writer." And I thought, maybe I can do something with this. And so over the years, as the kids grew up, they really didn't want me writing about them in public anymore. So I transitioned into writing more about just my spiritual journey and the things I was learning, just kind of the observations I have. And then when I started my Substack, that's really been my landing with my writing. It's called Beloved Beloved. And I write stories from the farm, stories from, conversations I've overheard, things I've read, places I've visited. I just try to draw inspiration just from my everyday life and use that as a way to help people see that you are beloved and you can be loved. You can live as one who is loved.
Yeah, I know when I read whatever you're writing, I always feel like you've invited me to go for a walk with you, and it just feels
I
like
love
a
that.
conversation. That's so interesting. So beloved, beloved. I'll put the link
Mhm.
in notes. I noticed just recently you've started a writing group for women, right?
Yeah. So my friend Amanda Parker and I noticed that there were a lot of women who wanted to write and didn't really know where to start. A lot of women with really important stories that need to be told, but don't know how to do it. So we started a group called Storyhood, and it's a community of women writers. And we meet here in Murfreesboro. We meet once a month at a local coffee shop. And you can follow us on Substack. We have a Storyhood Substack as well. It's Storyhood Community. And we get together, we do writing prompts, and we really are vulnerable with each other. With some of us write things that are funny, and some write things that everyone's crying by the time we've gotten to the end of it. But it's a safe space for women to tell their stories and just get better at writing. And our hope is to expand it more this next year into more than just writing, but really helping women just connect with whatever their expression of art or whatever it may be, to give women a place to really connect with other women because women are lonely, and even within churches women are lonely. So we're just trying to create a place for women to support each other.
So if there's someone here in California and you are going, I really want to start writing, you can get in your car and drive back to Murfreesboro, right? And just join
Yeah.
in.
Yeah, sure. Just it's a little short road trip. Yeah. And we do have the Substack, so you can submit things to Substack. Like if you'd like to share a story, if you've got something you'd like us to publish, we do that. And our dream is eventually to expand it. Who knows? We'll see. Maybe we'll end up in California sometime.
Well, Jeanine, thank you so much for spending, this time just talking. I've been reading, and now it's so beautiful to get a chance to talk with you. So thank you for taking the time. I'd really encourage all of you who are just, follow along with what I'm writing or putting out to check out Janine's Substack. You will be blessed at a deep level. It's beloved, beloved. And I'll put the link, like I said, and you'll find some story, you'll find some ideas, and you'll find encouragement that will touch you at a deep level. Just there's several moments, Janine, of what you've talked about. The farm, the experience with the animals around your goat. That has stayed with me, and some of the other expressions
Mm.
that you said today just touched at a deep level. So I so appreciate it, and look forward to another time when we might connect again.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. It's been
Yeah.
great.
Okay. Well, blessings to you, and thanks again.
Thank you.